I wasn't meant to break it. I was meant to understand it. The first time I noticed her, it wasn't because she was trying to be noticed. It was the quiet way she existed. Focused, deliberate, like every movement carried thought and purpose. In a world where everyone rushed to be seen, she seemed perfectly content fading into the hum of the room. Yet somehow, the silence around her demanded attention. We were part of an evening architecture workshop, a space where strangers shared tables, pencils, and fleeting ambitions. I joined hoping to refine my design instincts. She, I assumed, came to remember something she once loved. She always arrived early, setting her tools in order. Rulers aligned, sketchbook open to a clean page, her pencil sharpened to a precise point. It wasn't the act itself that fascinated me. It was the calm authority beneath it. From my seat across the table, I caught glimpses. Her brow furrowed in concentration, the faint movement of her wrist as she traced clean, deliberate lines. Every so often she'd pause, lift her gaze, and let her eyes linger on the space before her, as if measuring something invisible. That pause carried a weight I couldn't name. When she finally spoke, a quiet, "Could you pass me the scale?" Her voice didn't need to rise. It was soft, low, yet firm, the kind of voice that made you want to listen. She thanked me with a small nod and returned to her work, but the exchange stayed with me far longer than it should have. There was something about her presence, a balance between grace and restraint. She looked to be in her early 40s, elegant in an understated way, her posture straight but unguarded. Every gesture seemed intentional, shaped by years of discipline, and maybe loss. I didn't know her story, but I could sense there was one. Over the next few sessions, I found myself drawn to the rhythm she created, pencil to paper, quiet breath, the soft brush of her sleeve as she leaned closer to her work. I caught myself timing my breaks with hers, watching the way she sipped her coffee slowly, as though time was something she was finally learning not to fight. I didn't know it then, but every sketch she drew, every silence she kept, was part of something much deeper, a kind of emotional architecture. A structure built not from stone or steel, but from years of experience, regret, and resilience. And without realizing it, I'd already stepped inside. That IT started with a question that should have meant nothing. "Do you ever notice how every design reveals the person behind it?" she asked one evening, her pencil hovering midair as if frozen between thought and confession. I remember looking up, caught off guard, not by the question, but by the way she said it. Calm, but searching, like she wasn't really asking about architecture at all. I told her I thought buildings were like people. They stand because of what holds them together, not what's visible on the outside. She smiled, a small, knowing curve that said she understood more than she let on. From that night, our conversations found small ways to grow between the lines of our work. At first, they were about design principles, forgotten architects, and why symmetry comforts the human eye. But beneath the technical talk, something softer began to form, a rhythm, a pull. She asked about my projects, about why someone my age would spend his evenings chasing old theories instead of new trends. I asked about hers, though she never gave full answers, only fragments. "Once, I thought I could fix things by drawing them better," she said once, tracing the outline of a model with her fingertip. Turns out, some designs fall apart no matter how precise the lines. There was no bitterness in her tone, just quiet acceptance. But behind her eyes, I saw the remnants of something unhealed. I started staying later after class, pretending to finish sketches. She'd often linger too, reviewing notes she didn't really need to check. The space between us felt alive, filled with unspoken words and faint echoes of curiosity. Sometimes, she'd walk past me to leave and pause just long enough for our shoulders to brush. Once, she placed her hand on my sketchbook, complimenting a detail I'd nearly erased. Her fingers rested there a second too long, just enough for me to notice the warmth of her skin, the delicate lines that spoke of experience, not age. The air between us shifted after that. Nothing dramatic, just heavier somehow. Each word, each glance carried more weight. She began to look at me differently, not indulgently, but as though she was trying to remember what it felt like to be seen. We never acknowledged it, but the connection had formed. Invisible, delicate, and dangerous in its simplicity. And though we both pretended it was only about architecture, deep down we knew. The lines we were drawing on paper were beginning to blur within us, too. The night it happened, the classroom was nearly empty. The others had packed up early, leaving only the sound of rain against the high windows and the faint hum of the air conditioner. I stayed behind to redo a design. She stayed because she always did, the last to leave, the first to arrive. When I looked over, she wasn't sketching. Her hand rested still on the desk, eyes fixed on a half-finished model in front of her. There was a stillness about her that didn't feel peaceful. It felt fragile, as if one breath could make it crumble. "You ever build something," she said softly, "that looked perfect until you realized it couldn't hold its own weight?" She wasn't talking about the model. I could hear it, that quiet strain beneath her voice. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I just sat there, waiting for her to keep going, hoping she would. She told me about a project from years ago, her first big design. A partnership that was supposed to be her breakthrough. She described late nights, endless revisions, how everything she built seemed to mean something more than the structure itself. Then, her voice faltered. I thought I understood what strength meant. I didn't realize it could collapse from the inside. Her hand brushed over the model, tracing its fragile framework. The movement was absent, tender. She wasn't sad, not exactly. More like someone remembering a storm after the clouds had already passed. I wanted to ask more, but I didn't. It felt wrong to intrude. So I listened, quietly, until the silence between us grew soft again. After a while, she asked about me, about why I was so interested in structure, in form, in control. I admitted that I liked order, because feelings never stayed still. That sketches stayed where I put them. People didn't. She smiled, not mockingly, but with the kind of understanding that makes you feel both seen and slightly exposed. At some point, our hands met on the edge of the model. It wasn't intentional. My fingers brushed hers as we both reached to adjust a misaligned beam. She didn't pull away. Neither did I. For a moment, the room disappeared. The rain, the lights, the faint ticking of the clock, all of it blurred into the quiet pulse of being near her. She finally stood, gathering her things. "Careful," she said, glancing at the model. "Once you start restoring something broken, you'll find pieces of yourself in it too." And just like that, she left, leaving me staring at the model, wondering if she meant the design or us. The shift was almost invisible at first, a pause where there used to be ease, a distance where warmth once lingered. She still greeted me with that soft smile, still offered small nods of approval when I worked, but something in her had folded inward. One evening, after class, I caught her packing her sketches faster than usual. When I asked if everything was all right, she hesitated, then said quietly, "You're young. You don't see the cracks until it's too late." It wasn't what I expected. There was no anger, no sharpness, just a sadness dressed as restraint. She began leaving right after sessions ended, avoiding the long silences we used to share. Yet the few times our eyes met, I could see her guard wasn't indifference. It was fear. The next time it rained, I found her standing outside the building entrance, waiting under the awning. Her umbrella leaned against her leg, unopened. I asked if she wanted me to walk her to her car. She looked at me, really looked, and said, "You shouldn't." I wanted to ask why, but her tone made it clear she wasn't protecting herself from me. She was protecting me from what she thought might follow. Still, I walked beside her anyway. The streetlights reflected in shallow puddles, the scent of wet asphalt rising between us. She finally opened the umbrella, wide enough for both, but held it so that half the rain still touched my shoulder. It was a small thing, but it said everything, closeness with limits. "I thought I could be around something new without wanting it," she murmured. But I was wrong. The words hit harder than they should have. I didn't know what to say, whether to reach for her hand or pretend I didn't understand. My silence must have scared her, because she stepped slightly away, her umbrella tilting just enough for the rain to fall between us again. We reached her car. She thanked me, polite, professional, as if none of it had happened. Before leaving, she added, "You'll understand when you're older. Some designs aren't meant to last. Her headlights faded into the distance, but the scent of rain and her perfume lingered in the air. I stood there for a long time, soaked and motionless, realizing something terrifying. She wasn't the only one afraid of what we were building. I was 2 weeks past before I saw her again. She hadn't said she was taking time off, but the absence felt deliberate, like she needed distance to rebuild her walls. When she finally returned, something in her posture had changed. The confidence was there, but the openness was gone. That evening, while looking for extra tracing paper in the supply cabinet, I found an old folder tucked behind a stack of textbooks. Inside were sketches, architectural plans aged by time, and coffee stains. But what caught me wasn't the precision. It was the name signed in the corner. Hers. Each design was more expressive than the work she showed in class. Organic curves, imperfect balance, emotion hidden in geometry. They felt alive. And in one, a faint pencil note read, "Beauty isn't symmetry. It's endurance." I hesitated before bringing it to her, knowing it might cross a line. When I finally did, she froze, her hand resting on the folder like she was touching a ghost. "Where did you find this?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "In the cabinet." "I didn't mean to." She shook her head. "No, it's all right." She looked down at the drawings, tracing one of the lines with her fingertip. These were supposed to change everything. A design firm commissioned me years ago, before it all fell apart. I waited. The project collapsed. So did the people behind it, she said with a quiet laugh that didn't reach her eyes. I built my life around something that couldn't stand on its own. When it failed, I promised myself I'd never draw anything that wasn't safe again. Her confession wasn't dramatic. It was almost too calm, like she'd rehearsed it countless times. But there was pain there, the kind that doesn't scream, only echoes. I wanted to tell her that she didn't have to be safe with me, that not everything fragile breaks. But instead, I said, "You still draw like someone who believes in things lasting." She looked up, startled, not by the words, but by how gently they were said. For a heartbeat, the distance between us vanished. Then she whispered, "Belief isn't the problem. It's what happens when it turns into hope." She smiled, small, tired, honest, and gathered the old drawings as if they were something precious she could finally look at again. In that moment, I realized her heart wasn't cold. It was just hidden, an unfinished structure buried beneath fear and memory. And maybe I was meant to help her find the courage to build again. The air in the studio changed after that night. She no longer avoided me, but something in her eyes had softened, like she'd stopped running from the parts of herself she'd tried to forget. We started staying later again. Sometimes we didn't talk at all, just worked side by side, the silence between us filled with an understanding words would only weaken. The lamps cast a soft amber glow across her face, catching in the strands of hair that had fallen loose from her bun. She looked unguarded. That evening, she leaned over my shoulder to adjust a detail on my draft. Her perfume, faint jasmine with something darker beneath, brushed the air between us. Her hand rested lightly on mine as she guided the pencil. "You're forcing the symmetry," she said. Her voice trembled just enough to betray what her composure hid. I didn't pull away. "Maybe I'm trying too hard to make things balanced," I murmured. She smiled just barely. "Balance is overrated." Our hands stayed where they were. Neither of us looked up. The moment was so still, so fragile, that even breathing felt intrusive. When she finally did meet my eyes, it wasn't a look of invitation. It was recognition. The kind that happens when two people realize they've already crossed an invisible line without meaning to. The thunder outside cracked, breaking the silence. She blinked, exhaled, and stepped back, but not far. Her voice was quiet when she said, "You don't know what this could cost me." "Maybe not," I said, "but I know what it's worth." That broke her composure. She closed her eyes, just for a moment, like she was holding something back. Fear, longing, maybe both. Then she said, "Being near you, it reminds me what it feels like to want again. And I don't know if that's healing me or destroying me." She turned to the model on the table, tracing its frame with trembling fingers. "Every structure has a collapse point," she whispered. "Every heart does too." I reached out, covering her hand with mine. This time, she didn't move. The room felt smaller, warmer, like everything inside it had slowed to the rhythm of our breathing. No confession followed. No kiss. Just silence, thick with everything we couldn't say, everything we already knew. It wasn't a fall. It was a surrender. Quiet, terrifying, and absolutely real. The project was finished, and with it, something unspoken between us had reached its quiet resolution. The studio smelled faintly of sawdust and linseed oil, the air heavy with the weight of hours we had spent side by side. We didn't speak much, but the silence no longer felt like a wall. It felt like understanding. She stood across from me, holding the model we had built together. The curves were elegant, the lines imperfect, yet perfect in their imperfection, a reflection, perhaps, of everything we had navigated. She traced the edge lightly with her fingers, and I noticed how her hand lingered just a moment longer than necessary. It was a small gesture, but it carried the kind of intimacy that words could never capture. "Do you ever wonder," she said quietly, eyes fixed on a model, "if the things we build last because we want them to, or because we let them?" I watched her, noticing the way her shoulders relaxed slightly, the tension in her jaw softening. "Maybe both," I said. "Some structures are stronger because they're fragile. They survive because we care enough not to break them." She looked at me then, fully, and in that glance I saw years of experience, pain, and resilience, the kind of depth only life could carve into a person. She smiled, small, quiet, as though she had acknowledged something to herself more than to me. We didn't need to say more. Words felt superfluous. Everything we had shared, the long evenings, the subtle touches, the unspoken confessions, had built something tangible between us. Not a declaration, not a promise of forever, but a recognition of the bond we had forged. She gathered her sketches, her movements careful, precise, like the hands of someone who knew how delicate the thing she loved could be. I reached out, almost instinctively, to brush a stray lock of hair from her face. She didn't flinch. She let it happen, a quiet acknowledgement that the distance between us had softened, even if it wasn't entirely gone. Outside, the sun was rising, casting golden light across the studio. Dust motes danced lazily in the beams, and for a moment, it felt as if time itself had paused to witness the moment. "Whatever happens next," she said softly, "we've built something that matters. Even if it doesn't last, it won't be forgotten." I nodded, feeling the truth of it. And just like that, we left the studio together, not as lovers bound by certainty, not as strangers, but as two people changed, quietly and profoundly, by the architecture of their hearts. Some structures are meant to endure. Others are meant to leave a mark, invisible but permanent, long after the builders have walked away. And in that, we had found our resolution, fragile, imperfect, and beautiful. Ending. Separation with lasting impact. Their connection doesn't become a conventional romance, but it changes them forever, leaving a permanent blueprint etched into their hearts.